of now you have the Super Nintendo era of Mega Man X, and now jumping properly into the 7th generation of consoles with
Mega Man X4.
Originally released on the Sega Saturn and PlayStation in 1997, and a year later on PCs. X4 was my introduction to the Mega Man franchise back in the late 90s, as I played it on my family's Windows 98 PC. However, I didn't play any Mega Man title until the Wii Shop days. My very first Mega Man game is also considered as one of the most popular in the X saga, alongside the original Mega Man X. While Mega Man X4 was certainly getting a comfortable release on the Sega Saturn, at least in the US, Capcom had a rough time trying to get Sony of America's approval to release the game alongside Mega Man 8. Thankfully, they did release them both. Apparently, Sony of America wasn't too big on releasing 2D games to the West, as they wanted to focus on the 3D graphics that the system was known for. But according to a Capcom spokesperson at the time, it wasn't a personal thing against 2D, it was just core in the system. While 3D gaming was the trend in the late 90s, it was great that certain developers like Capcom and SNK were still making sprite-based 2D games. Kinda funny now, since a lot of those 2D games still hold up well visually compared to 3D games that were trending at the time. The CD consoles allow games to do so much more, like animated cutscenes, voice acting, better sound quality, adding more detail to the sprites and animation, in which this game provides, for better and for worse. The music was composed by Toshihiko Horiyama, who contributed to many Mega Man titles as well as the Ace Attorney titles. I enjoyed a variety of the tracks in this game, such as Magma Dragoon's theme, Jet Stingray's theme, as well as both the X and Zero version of the opening stage. The other variety is nice, ranging from a jungle, a level set in cyberspace, and one of my favourite set pieces, a train level. The Saturn version even has a nice wave effect in the volcano stage. The sprites and animations are nicely detailed. I love the addition of the after images when X and Zero dash, and the explosions after a killer enemy really hypes up the action. The animated cutscenes look good, giving it a retro anime flavour. No, it does look quite pixelated when displayed on a HD screen. The voice acting though is, well...
What a freak.
Colonel!
What?
I'm disappointed in you, Colonel.
Wait, Zero! I'm serious!
Please! Brother, please! Don't you remember? Zero saved my life.
Iris! Ah! No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
It's bad. I don't think the high-pitched feminine voice matches someone named Mega Man. The voices can be a bit hard to hear sometimes, with a few yawn pauses in between lines. Despite the bad voice acting, I have a soft spot for it. Around the time of its release, plenty of games were notorious with bad performances, but I find a lot of them charming and hilarious. I often quote a lot of the lines like,
What do you think you're doing? It's not too late. Stop the coup now.
and
My fate is sealed. I have no choice.
and of course the infamous
What? What am I fighting for?
Unfortunately, the voice acting triples X4's serious attempt at a story. The previous games had plot, but with the assistance from the new hardware, the team had attempted to flesh out the world and its characters. X4 has two campaigns, one where you play as X and the other as Zero. The overall plot is similar in both, as you would still be going through the same stages, but they do have some differences. Firstly, let's start with X. X's campaign begins with an interaction between the new character, the General, the leader of the military Reptoid group, the Rapture Force, and a shadowy figure who isn't totally obviously Sigma. Sigma tries to convince the General to go after the humans as they would go after them. However, the General isn't buying his bullshit and dismisses Sigma from the room. During the first stage, Star Lagoon, a floating city falls down and is destroyed, leaving a large population dead. The situation of the first stage is a lot more grim than what happened before. After X defeats a giant Meta Dragon, he meets the Colonel, an important figure of the Rapture Force. X asks the Colonel to come to Maverick Hunter base for questioning, as the Rapture Force were present when Star Lagoon was under attack. However, because of the Colonel's stubbornness, seeing that lowering his weapon is a sign of cowardice, refuses, marking the Rapture Force as Mavericks. We then see the General have a speech saying the humans have accused them as Mavericks, and that they are going to build a utopia known as the final weapon, so Reptoids can live in peace. Similar to Magneto in the X-Men comics building Asteroid M. The Hunters see them as a threat, so throughout the game you have to stop their plans. Kenji and Afune, who took up the producer role and helped with the writing, wanted to try to portray the Rapture Force as a morally grey group trying to question the heroes' actions. However, I feel it fails trying to make me sympathise with them in this scenario. The Colonel could have just come in for questioning to prove the Rapture Force's innocence. We could have gotten a scene where the Hunters question the Colonel at the base, and if the Hunters still accuse them as Mavericks afterwards, then fair play. It could have been interesting, but just refusing because of pride and stubbornness just makes this conflict stupid and pointless. Especially since we know that the General was aware of someone who wanted to take down the Maverick Hunters. If you played any of the prior games, then you know that it is Sigma in the beginning of the game and the one who is behind everything. We even find out the one who destroyed Star Lagoon being Magma Dragoon, a former Maverick Hunter earlier in the game, just so he could fight the main characters. It's ridiculous! At the end of the day, Mega Man stops both the Rapture Force and Sigma and calls it a day. One thing I do like now is that the bosses you fight aren't all Mavericks and are members of the Rapture Force, giving you reasons to fight them, like stopping CS Beast from supplying weapons and resources to the Rapture Force. There are only 3 Mavericks you actually fight in X4, being Cyber Peacock, Split Mushroom, and the previously mentioned Magma Dragoon, who all work for Sigma. Adding Gaillard before the fight stresses them out a bit more than disappearing like in the previous games, and in the Japanese version they even have unique voice tips before the fights. While X's campaign is another excuse to kick Sigma's ass, Zero's campaign fleshes out his backstory and is connected to a couple of characters in the story. While it was teased in X3 that Zero is a creation of Dr. Wily, we get actual confirmation in X4, as well as Zero being the original Maverick that caused Sigma to go evil. This was also mentioned in the arcade fighting game Mega Man 2 The Power Fighters in Base's Ending, and I believe it will be discussed further in the Mega Man Zero series. Zero's has personal connections to the Colonel and Iris, the Colonel's sister, as well as Zero's love interest. While Colonel was harsh towards X in the opening stage, he seems to respect Zero and thanks him for saving Iris during the Star Lagoon attack. However, like X's campaign, he still refuses to negotiate with the Hunters and just the same fails and dies by the player's hands. During the final stages, Iris is distressed, seeing Zero kill the Colonel and fights him to the death. Unfortunately, Iris also dies, leaving Zero mourning the loss of both of their deaths. First time seeing this with no prior knowledge of the franchise, as well as being at 8 or 9, this was pretty sad. but now playing the previous games, it didn't leave much of an impression besides having a funny joke in the Mega Man community. If we knew Iris before this game, saw more of the relationship, as well as good performances, this scene would have hit hard, but it didn't do much for me in the end. The story had a lot of potential, and with the right script and solid voice acting, this could have been a great story discussing what makes a Maverick, but at the end of the day, this is the weakest part of the game. I think if Maverick Hunter X was successful and we got remakes for the rest of the titles, then I think a lot of these issues could have been adjusted to make a compelling story. While the story is bad, the gameplay still holds up today, being just as fun as it was back in the 90s, with a lot of Mega Man's moves still being intact. His dash animations have more frames, so you cannot instantly go into another dash, but you can go just as fast as he did in the previous titles by immediately jumping afterwards and then dash. The upgrades this time are pretty great. The Ed upgrade doesn't give X an extra jump, but he can either perform a mid-air dash or can hover for a short while, which can be used to reposition yourself in fights and reach new areas. There are actually 2 arm upgrades to choose from, which both can be found in the same area. You can either pick the one that soars 4 charge shots at once, or my personal favourite, the Plasma Charge Shot, that fires a powerful blast and uses multiple plasma balls that do constant damage. The Plasma Shot is so useful in boss fights and can leave a majority of enemies into dust. The head upgrades in the previous titles were usually the weakest part of X's kick. The one in X1 didn't have many opportunities that it can be used. X2 and X3 had an item tracker that was good to find items, but had some drawbacks, with X2 making the player defenseless, and X3 can only be used once at the beginning of each stage. X4 decided to scrap those ideas and instead made it so you fire an endless amount of uncharged special weapons, making the special weapons a bit more useful than if they were limited. The weapons are alright for the most part, though there were some like Frost Tower I only used for enemy weaknesses. Lightning Wave creates a wall that you can walk it off to reach new heights. Rising Fire was useful in the odd vertical areas. Soul Body was a good shield weapon, creating a hologram in front of you, and Quincyassa, while weak, covers a lot of areas. The torso cuts damage in half, like it always does, but now allows X to use the Nova Strike, which launches himself in midair and does an invincible dash attack. It is very strong, but it can only be used once before it needs to be charged. By itself, it's not that good. There were some playthroughs that I completely forgot it was a thing, but with my tip, the Nova Strike can be busted. On the character select screen, do these sets of combinations. Make sure you hold the shoulder buttons until the opening scene ends and you are on your X, who has a purple color scheme instead of the light blue color scheme. Enter any capsule and you will unlock the ultimate armor that includes all the upgrades and lets X do an endless amount of Nova Strikes, and man, this move with the ultimate armor breaks the game. Nova Strike does more damage than the bosses' weaknesses, making them total pushovers. The bosses are better here than they were in X3, but like X3, they do suffer Spark Mantle Syndrome, making them incredibly easy. If you aren't using your weakness, then the majority of the bosses are actually fun to fight against, as unlike the previous game, these bosses have a variety of moves that will test your abilities. They can be fought in any order, without too much trouble. New to this game is that you can finally play as Zero properly. While Zero was playable in X3, he could only be used once per stage to not fight bosses, to get power-ups, and if he died, once he was gone for good. But now, Zero is fully functional, just like X, and has his own campaign and his own moveset, gets in the Buster, and fully using his Z-Saber to an excellent melee fighter. A few people say Zero is the hard mode due to the fact that he has to be upfront to destroy his foes and doesn't have many boss weaknesses weapons, but I would say it mostly comes down to preference. Do you prefer a long-range fighter that keeps his distance, or do you prefer to be up close and personal? Personally, I prefer playing as Zero. Unlike X, Zero cannot gain new armor pieces, but he does learn new abilities when defeating bosses, like getting a double jump and a fiery uppercut attack. He was originally going to have an ultimate armor too, but was removed due to time constraints, though a similar design was used in Command Mission and the mobile game Rockman X Dive. Zero's moves don't require ammo besides the Digicat he gets from Cyber Peacock, so you can use them as many times as you like, and makes the new weapon tank very useless in his campaign, since the Digicat can be refilled when Zero gets hit. There is less backtracking if you pick Zero, since you don't need to pick up the armor parts, giving you more freedom to pick the stage you want. The amount of E-tanks are half, from 4 to 2, and in its place you get a weapon tank that can refill your ammo, and an item that makes you restart with 4 lives instead of 2 when you get a game over. The weapon tank is a fine addition, but with the head upgrade it becomes almost useless if it wasn't for the charged special attacks. Lives are meaningless here. The levels in Act 4 are divided up into 2 acts, so if you get a game over in the second act, you can restart at the second act. So far, this is the easiest game in the series, but it is also probably the most straightforward, with so far the least amount of backtracking. There were like maybe 1 or 2 instances where I had to backtrack with X. While I've criticised the story and voice acting, I don't think the plot was the reason why people enjoy the Mega Man X series. I felt X4 trimmed a lot of fat from X3, making things more streamlined, yet still incredibly fun to play and easy to get into, especially with Zero's new playstyle. This is still my favourite game so far in this marathon, that I feel is a good option to start with alongside the first title. Next time I tackle the 5th installment that almost became the final chapter. If you played Mega Man X4, let me know what you think of it. Until then, take care.